I'm gonna show you 5 jazz licks that'll have you sounding like a pro and unveil some of the secrets that jazz musicians are using in their solos. Coming right up. Okay, so these 5 licks were composed by our in-house composer, Keelan Dimmick, on my team for our Inner Circle members. And these licks really demonstrate what the pro jazz musicians are doing that make their solos and their sound so amazing and so professional. So some of these techniques we're gonna talk about are really important, and I want you to pay attention because even if you just introduce some of these things that you're playing today, you're gonna reap the benefits later. Okay, so lick number 1 is an example of what professional jazz musicians often do over top of 5 to 1 chord progressions, and it sounds like this. Okay, so this comes straight out of the blues. So we have a C7 alt, which is acting as a 5 chord, going to an F7. So it's sort of like a 5 to 1 relationship. This is actually pulled out of the blues. So actually that F7 is the 4 chord, but 5 to 1. So jazz musicians will often use what we call the altered harmony over 5 chords that resolve to 1 chords. So, right? And the first note that we're playing here is a D sharp note over top of this C7. So a D sharp is a sharp 9, and then we do a chromatic, right? A chromatic run down. Basically, we're doing this system where we're going down to the G sharp and down to the E natural, which is the 3rd of the C7. So that's another important thing, is even though we're doing these altered notes, these notes that are really outside of the scale, we're always resolving to important chord tones such as the 3rd. Okay, so, right, and those following notes, the D sharp again is the sharp 9, the C sharp is the flat 9, and then we resolve to a C natural on the F7. So the C natural would be the 5th. So gives it this really outside sound that makes you feel uncomfortable for a second, but resolves nicely. Okay, so lick number 2 is over a 1, 4, 3, 6 chord progression, and it sounds like this. Okay, so a 1, 4, 3, 6 in concert C would be C7 if we're playing a blues harmony, F7, E minor 7, A7, right? So something that jazz musicians are always doing is they're targeting altered extensions on chords and taking liberties with doing that. So for example, our first note, we do a little grace note into this F sharp note over top of the C. Now F sharp over a C is actually the sharp 11, right? So that's an altered extension that sounds really out. So it goes, right? So even though we're doing all this chromatic movement and we're starting on a not strong chord tone at all, what we're doing is we're targeting this G natural here on the F7. So, and the G natural is the 9 of the F7, right? So that's an extension, but it's still within the scale, so it has a solid feeling to it, right? But we're also hitting a B natural in here, which is also the sharp 11 of F7. So we're really playing off of this sharp 11 idea over top of the dominant 7th chord, so. Right? And all that is pretty outside, but the way we resolve the line is what makes it sound great. So we go to this E minor 7, a little, right? And the C sharp, when we get to the A7, is the 3rd of A7. So it gives us that feeling of stability. And so jazz musicians are constantly using notes outside of the scale, not within the chord, but the reason it sounds good in the end is because they're resolving it to strong chord tones and giving us this sense of stability, and then we leave feeling amazed by what they just played. Lick number 3 is over one of the most common chord progressions in jazz, and that would be a 2-5 chord progression, usually a 2-5-1. In this particular case, it's a 2-5, and this is what it sounds like. So a 2-5 in concert C major, for example, would be D minor 7 to G7, right? And we actually start this line off on the 9th, that's E natural. So starting off on an extension is a nice idea because remember, if we resolve it to a strong chord tone, that's what's gonna make it sound great. So And then we go to the triplet pattern here. Right? So that's a great idea. Lots of times in bebop, we're adding these triplet rhythms within the mix of the eighth notes. So that's another thing that pro jazz musicians are doing. Okay, so really just moving down the arpeggio of the D minor 7, right? But we're actually landing on the octave lower, the ninth, right? So jazz musicians are also always trying to tie their lines together to make musical sense, right? So now, this is the note right here that we're really targeting when we get to the G7, and it's the sharp 11. So we've seen this before, targeting the sharp 11 on a dominant 7th chord or any extension, and it just hanging out there for a second sounds really hip and really cool. So now, again, we've talked about this before, we end up resolving to this B natural at the end of the line. Now, again, B natural, as it's concerned with G, is the third. So once again, we're resolving the entire line on the third, giving it this very stable sound that's pleasing to our ears. We're always creating tension and then resolution. Lick number 4 is another 2-5 chord progression with a different approach. Here's what it sounds like. Okay, so again, it's a D minor 7 to a G7 in concert C. So it's right, sounds really nice. Now, something that I really like about this line is we start again, once again, on a non-diatonic note. Non-diatonic meaning it's outside of the key. So we start with a C sharp that leads into a D natural, which is, of course, the root, right? So jazz musicians are always doing this, right? They're taking a note that is chromatic outside of the key and resolving it, even if just for a second. Now, this one is actually kind of simple because it actually kind of walks up the scale, the D minor scale to start with. Does a little hop up to this C natural, breaking the pattern of the scale, which is, again, something that jazz musicians are also doing a lot, is they may be running up or down a scale, but they'll use a skip or a step to create that melodic interest. Now, we jump up to this E natural when we get to the G7. Right? Now that note is actually the 13th, right? But the most important thing I want to point out to you here is the next phrase, right? Which sounds like this. So E, C sharp, D, B natural. Now we already know we're resolving a B natural. We already know that's the third of G7. So once again, we're ending on a strong chord tone that really defines the chord. But what we have here is what's called an enclosure pattern. So an enclosure pattern is when you're approaching a target note from above and below. So in this particular case, we have a couple target notes here. So in one, we're targeting this D from this E and this C sharp. But also within this, we're targeting this B natural, which is the ultimate destination, with this C sharp and this D natural. Again, either above and below or below and above. So when we do this, it sounds super bebop-y, right? This is a pattern that jazz musicians are always using in their lines. So getting familiar with the enclosure pattern will be really helpful for you. Okay, lick number 5 is also over a very common chord progression in jazz, which is the 1-6-2-5 chord progression, and it sounds like this. So a 1-6-2-5-1 chord progression in concert C major is C major 7 to A7 to D minor 7 to G7. Very, very common chord progression. You definitely want to master this one. So one thing I really like about this particular line is it starts on the major 7. Okay, that's B natural. So, and once again, we have this little triplet pattern walking down. Now the target note that we're really targeting is this B flat over top of the A7. The A7 is the 6th chord, right? So what is the B flat over top of the A7? Well, that's the flat 9. So jazz musicians are often resolving to flat 9s over top of dominant 7th chords when they know that it's going to resolve somewhere. And they're even bold enough, as in this case, to land on it for a long time. So in other words, tension for a long time, no resolution, no major chord tones. Because because they know that they're going to resolve it later on, right? And let's go through the next part of it. So then we have this pickup note, G sharp, non-diatonic note going into the A natural over top of the D minor 7. So it sounds like this, right? And then we hit that G sharp again, but this time over top of the G7, which is a 5 chord, right? So now, what is the G sharp over top of G7? Again, that is the flat 9. So it has this beautiful sound when we're really targeting those flat 9s. Right, so that's one way to really make your line sound super hip, is focus on sometimes targeting those flat 9s over top of dominant 7th chords. So learning licks, by the way, is a great practice to do, especially if you're learning them by ear. And it's also a great idea to learn entire solos by ear, because there's a lot to be learned from that. So I have on the screen right now a video called How to Learn a Jazz Solo by Ear. I give you the exact step-by-step process that I would go to so that it's easy, even if you've never done it before. So click the video on the screen right now to go check out that one. If you like this video, make sure you press that like button, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.